7 years, 3 months, and 11 days after he buried an empty casket, Hugh Baxter sat at his usual corner table at Meridian, the restaurant on the 4th floor of his own hotel, and wondered, as he did every year on this particular night, whether grief ever actually dulled, or whether a person simply got better at carrying it. He always thought about Serena on November 4th. The restaurant hummed with the kind of soft, expensive noise that good money could buy, the low clink of crystal, the murmur of people who had nowhere urgent to be. The staff had learned over the years to give Mr. Baxter his space on this evening. No small talk, no cheerful commentary about the evening specials, just the food he ordered and the quiet he needed. In front of him sat a glass of Bordeaux that had barely been touched. On the white tablecloth beside it, half obscured by his hand, lay a small silver locket on a chain. He'd set it there the way other men might set a photograph. It was the same locket he carried every day in the breast pocket of his jacket, silver, oval, no larger than his thumbnail, with a vine leaf pattern etched along its edge. He'd had 2 made, years ago, identical. One for himself, one for Serena. His had her photo inside. Hers, he'd assumed, was gone, buried somewhere in the wreckage of the car that had gone off Route 43 on a wet November night, or lost in the fire that followed. He'd never found it. He'd never stopped looking, not really. Some part of him kept searching for pieces of her everywhere. He was 52 years old, the founder of Baxter Meridian Hotels, a man whose name appeared in the financial press with regularity and in the social pages, less than his publicist would have liked. He had built something substantial from very little, his mother's savings, a borrowed belief, and a jaw-clenching refusal to fail. Serena had watched him build all of it. She had believed in him before any of the numbers made sense. 7 years without her had not made him smaller, but they had made him very quiet in the places that mattered most. He was reaching for the wine when the commotion near the entrance pulled his attention across the room. A child had slipped past the host station. She was maybe 11, maybe 12. It was hard to tell because she was the kind of thin that comes not from youth but from going without. Her hair was dark and tangled, held back with a rubber band that had seen better days. Her jacket was too large, clearly a man's, the sleeves turned up twice. Her sneakers were worn down at the heels. She stood just inside the dining room doorway with the stillness of someone who had learned not to draw attention to herself, scanning the room with dark eyes that were doing a very careful kind of math. She was looking at the food on other people's tables. The host was already moving toward her, apologetic but firm. 2 diners near the door had turned to stare. The girl didn't run. She just watched the man coming for her with the expression of someone who had been removed from places before and knew exactly how it went. Hugh raised a hand. "That's all right," he said, across the dining room. "She can stay." The host paused, visibly uncertain. Hugh gave him the look that ended discussions. The man stepped back. The girl found the voice that had intervened, and her eyes settled on Hugh. She was assessing him the way children who had lived difficult lives learned to assess adults, quickly and without sentiment. "Come sit down," Hugh said, and gestured to the chair across from him. "Have you eaten tonight?" "A beet, then." "No, sir." "Then sit." She crossed the room carefully, like someone moving through a space she wasn't sure she had permission to inhabit. She climbed into the chair across from him and folded her hands on the table, with a formality that was almost heartbreaking. "What's your name?" Hugh asked. "Nell," she said. "I'm Hugh." He offered his hand, and after a moment she shook it. Small fingers, a dry palm, a grip more decided than he'd expected. "What do you like to eat, Nell?" "Anything." He called the server over and ordered a bowl of pasta, some bread, a glass of milk, and a slice of apple pie. Nell didn't object to any of it. When it arrived, she ate the way someone eats when they have been truly hungry, steadily, without hurry, finishing each thing before moving to the next. There was a dignity to it that Hugh found he couldn't look away from. He didn't press her with questions. He had learned long ago that people, even children, open up faster when you stop reaching for them. It was while she was working through the pie that she noticed it. Her fork slowed. Her eyes had drifted across the table and landed on the silver locket he'd left beside his wine glass. She stared at it for a moment that stretched on just a beat too long. "My mum has one like that," she said. Hugh's hand went still. "Sorry," he said. Nell looked up at him, unself-conscious. "A locket, silver, looks like that one, same kind of swirly things on the edge." She tilted her head slightly. "She keeps it on her nightstand. She opens it before she goes to sleep. Every night." The restaurant continued its low, well-mannered noise around them. Someone laughed softly 2 tables over. The Bordeaux sat untouched. Hugh picked up the locket and held it between his fingers, very carefully, as if testing its weight. "The vine pattern," he said, "on the border." "Yeah," Nell pointed. "Like that, except hers is on a longer chain. There was only 1 locket like this in the world. 2, to be precise, but they were the same design, made by the same jeweler in Savannah, custom work, never reproduced. He had carried his for 7 years. He had assumed Serena's was gone. "What does the inside look like?" he asked, and his voice, to his own ears, came from somewhere very far away. "Her locket." Nell thought about it. "There's a picture. 2 people, real small. She made a tiny rectangle with her fingers. She won't let me touch it, but I've seen it." Hugh set the locket down on the tablecloth with great care. "Tell me about your mom," he said. "What's her name?" Nell wrapped both hands around her glass of milk. "Rennie," she said. "Most people call her Rennie. Her real name is Serena." The air in the room changed, thicker somehow, like something had shifted in the atmosphere that no one else could feel. Hugh kept his expression as still as he knew how. He had sat across from difficult men in difficult rooms for 30 years. He knew how to hold himself together. "Serena," he repeated. "She works at a bakery," Nell said, returning to her pie, seemingly satisfied with the conversation. "Tuesday through Sunday. She decorates the cakes. She's really good at it." A pause. "We live in Garfield." Garfield. A town about 90 minutes southeast of Chicago, off the interstate. Small, the kind of place where people went to be left alone. "Do you have a picture of her?" Hugh asked. "Your mom." Nell looked at him with a flash of her careful assessment. Then she reached into the pocket of the oversized jacket and pulled out a small plastic wallet, blue, clearly a child's, and extracted a photograph that had been folded twice and was worn soft along the creases. She set it on the table between them. Hugh unfolded it. The woman in the photograph was standing in front of a white building on a bright day. She was thinner than he remembered, and her hair was shorter, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. But the shape of her face was the same. The way she held her chin was the same. The particular quality of her smile, restrained, like she was keeping something back, was exactly the same. He had looked at Serena Baxter's face in a photograph every single day for 7 years. He would have known her anywhere. His hands were not entirely steady when he refolded the picture and set it back across the table. "Nell," he said, "how did you get here tonight?" "Bus, then walked." "That's a long way." She shrugged with the economy of someone who had learned not to make much of inconveniences. "Mom was working late. The apartment was cold. I walked until I saw the lights." Hugh stepped away from the table for barely 2 minutes to call his head of security. When he returned, Nell had finished the pie and was sitting with her hands folded again, watching the room with those attentive eyes. "I'd like to take you home," he told her. "Make sure you get back safely." She studied him. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He picked up the locket and slipped it back into his breast pocket. "I'd like to." The drive to Garfield took an hour and 40 minutes in the November dark. Nell fell asleep in the back seat 20 minutes out of the city, her head tipped against the window, one hand tucked under her cheek. Hugh drove and said nothing. His mind was moving very fast in a direction he wasn't sure he was ready for. The locket, only 2 existed. He was carrying one, Serena had the other. He ran through every explanation that wasn't the obvious one, and none of them held. Nell directed him, half asleep, through Garfield's quiet streets, until they reached a yellow building on the edge of a residential block, a bakery on the ground floor. Dark and closed at this hour, with apartment stairs climbing the outside of the building. A single window on the 2nd floor was lit. "That's us," Nell said. He walked with her up the exterior stairs. The railing was loose. He noted it the way a person notes things when their mind is sharpening itself for something it cannot otherwise prepare for. Nell knocked twice in a pattern, their signal he understood. There was movement behind the door, Then the click of a deadbolt. The door opened. For a moment, just a moment, not long enough to be measured in any ordinary way, the three of them existed in a kind of suspension. The woman in the doorway, with her flour-dusted apron and her tired eyes and her dark hair pulled back. The man at the top of the stairs, with his hotel dinner jacket and 7 years of grief, pressing against the inside of his chest. Her face went white. "Serena," Hugh said. It was not a question. He didn't need to make it one. "Mom?" Nell looked between them. "Do you know him?" Serena's hand found her daughter's shoulder and pressed her gently inside. "Go get ready for bed, sweetheart. I'll be right in." Her voice was remarkably steady. Hugh had always admired that about her. Her voice almost never gave her away. Almost. Nell disappeared inside, throwing one long, curious look over her shoulder. The door didn't close all the way. Serena stepped out onto the narrow landing, pulling it nearly shut behind her, and faced him. "You need to go," she said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere." She crossed her arms. He recognized that too. The armor crossing, the pulling inward. He had watched her do it in the early years of their marriage when she was frightened of something and refusing to admit it. "I've been standing at your grave for 7 years," he said, "and Nell is 11. She closed her eyes. "She was born here," Serena said. "I was 4 months along when I left. You didn't know." "I know that now." He kept his voice down, aware of the partially open door, the child inside within earshot. "I need to understand why." She looked out over the dark street. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking at something. The cold pressed in around them. "Do you remember a man named Chester Strand?" she asked. The name hit him the way a door slammed in a quiet room. Chester Strand, a silent investor who had come into their expansion fund 5 years before she disappeared, who had proved over time to have interests that went well beyond hotels, and who had not taken kindly to Hugh's attempts to have him removed. There had been lawyers, there had been threats that never quite became explicit enough to act on. "He came to me," Serena said. 3 weeks before the accident, I was getting into my car in the parking structure. He was there, waiting. He had photographs of me, at the grocery store, at my Obgyn appointment. He knew I was pregnant." She paused. "I hadn't told you yet. I was waiting until we got back from the Boston trip." Her voice was level, but Hugh could see the effort it was costing her. "He told me that if I stayed, if I remained in your life in any form, neither I nor the child would survive the month." Hugh said nothing. He let the silence carry the weight it needed to carry. "I believed him," Serena said simply. "I knew what he was capable of. I'd heard things I couldn't unhear. And I was standing in a parking structure at 9 o'clock at night, alone, and all I could think about was our baby." Her voice dropped. "So I made a decision. I called a friend who works in film production. I told him I needed something that would look catastrophic and leave almost nothing behind. I took money from the private account, just enough. I moved every few months at first, afraid he'd find me. Then Nell was born, and eventually we stopped here." "Strand died in federal custody," Hugh said. 4 years ago, securities fraud, tax evasion, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit extortion. He had a heart attack before sentencing." She nodded slowly. "I read about it at the library." "And then?" She looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time since the door had opened, and then 4 years had already passed. "I'd seen pieces of news about you, the new properties, the foundation. There was a profile that said you had rebuilt your life." She stopped. "I told myself you were better off." "You were wrong," Hugh said. The words fell between them without heat, just the fact of them. "I know that," she said quietly. "I know." The door behind her shifted slightly. Nell's face appeared in the gap. "Mom, it's cold out." "I know, Nell. Give me a few minutes." "He can come inside," Nell said, with the practical generosity of a child who had spent time in cold places. "We have a space heater." Hugh glanced at Serena. After a moment, she stepped aside. The apartment was small, 2 rooms and a kitchen, the kind of space that shouldn't have fit a life in but clearly had. Nell's drawings were taped to the refrigerator in overlapping rows. Library books sat in a stack on the floor. There was a braided rug that had been patched in 2 places, and a lamp with a shade that was slightly crooked. Everything was clean. Everything was cared for, with the particular pride of someone who had decided that circumstances would not take their dignity. On the nightstand beside the narrow mattress, Serena's side, was a locket on a long silver chain, oval, vine-leaf border, identical to the one in Hugh's pocket. He stood in the middle of the room and felt something shift in him that hadn't moved in 7 years. "You kept it," he said. Serena followed his gaze. "Of course I kept it." "Nell," Hugh said, and the girl looked up from where she'd settled cross-legged on her half of the mattress. "There's something important, your mum, and I want to tell you." Nell looked at her mother. Serena sat down beside her daughter and took her hand. She breathed in once, steadily, and began. She told Nell a simplified version of the truth, that she and Hugh had been together long ago, that something dangerous had separated them, that she had been protecting Nell before Nell was even born. She told her that Hugh was the man who had loved her before she existed, and that he hadn't known about her until tonight. Nell listened the way she did everything, carefully, without interruption, with that quality of attention Hugh was already coming to recognize as entirely her own. When Serena finished, there was a pause. "So you're my dad," Nell said, looking at Hugh. "Yes." She turned it over in her mind, visibly. "Then, is that why you let me eat the pie?" Despite everything, despite the weight and the strangeness, and the 7 years he would never get back. Hugh laughed, a real one, surprised out of him. Serena put a hand over her mouth and her shoulders shook once. "No," Hugh said, when he could speak. "I let you eat the pie because you were hungry. I'd have done that for anyone. But I got to eat it because I'm your daughter." "That too." Nell seemed satisfied with this distinction. She looked at the locket on the nightstand, then at Hugh's pocket where he'd tucked his own. "You have the same one," she said. "We do." "Why?" "Because your father had them made," Serena said. "2 identical ones, one for each of us, so that wherever we were, we'd each be carrying the same thing." Nell thought about this with the gravity it deserved. "Like walkie-talkies," she said finally, "except for feelings." Neither adult spoke for a moment. "Yes," Hugh said, "exactly like that." He arranged a car to take them to the Baxter Grand that night. Serena resisted. Something like 2 weeks of resistance was probably baked into her by now, Hugh thought. But Nell said, without any drama whatsoever, "Mom, the heat went out on Tuesday," and that was the end of the conversation. Nell fell asleep in the car with her head on her mother's shoulder. Serena sat very still, watching the highway lights pass, saying nothing for a long while. "I'm not asking anything from you," Hugh said quietly, his eyes on the road. "I want to say that before we get there. I'm not asking you to pick up where we left off. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are. He stopped. Started again. "She's my daughter, Serena, and you're alive. Whatever that means going forward, those 2 facts change everything." Serena looked at him in the dark of the car. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm coming." The suite was on the 12th floor, with 2 bedrooms and a view of the lake that looked, at this hour, like scattered light on black silk. Nell woke when they arrived and stood at the window in her socks for a full 2 minutes without saying a word. "That's Lake Michigan," Hugh told her. "I know what it is," Nell said. "I've just never seen it from up here." In the morning, he ordered room service for 3 pancakes, which Nell immediately declared her favorite, even though the way she ate them suggested she'd had them rarely. While they waited for the food, she sat at the small table and asked Hugh questions with the relentlessness of someone who had stored them up overnight. What kind of hotels did he build? Were all the rooms this big? What happened to restaurant food when nobody ate it? He answered all of them. Serena watched from across the table, coffee in both hands, tired and unguarded in the way people only are in the very early morning. She was still the person he had known. He could see her exactly, the way she tilted her head, the particular crinkle at the corner of her left eye when she was trying not to smile. He had been right all those years not to fully believe she was gone. Over the days that followed, something tentative and real began taking shape between all 3 of them. Hugh cleared his calendar. He drove them back to Garfield to collect Nell's things, her library books, her drawings, the patched rug, the crooked lamp, because Nell asked if she could bring the rug, and he couldn't think of a single reason to say no. Serena enrolled Nell in a school on the north side of the city. Nell's only comment on the matter was that she hoped they had a library, because she was in the middle of something. The school had a library. Things did not move easily or quickly between Hugh and Serena. They were careful with each other, the way you are with something you have broken before and are not certain will hold. But there were evenings when all three of them were in the suite together. Nell at the table with her reading, Hugh at his laptop, Serena beside him with her coffee, and Hugh would look up and find the room full in a way it hadn't been in a very long time. He didn't rush it. He had spent 7 years moving fast to outrun a silence. He could afford now to be still. 3 weeks in, Nell found both lockets on the kitchen counter, where Hugh had left them side by side the night before, comparing them. She picked them up, one in each hand, weighing them. "Can I open them?" she asked. "Go ahead," Hugh said. She opened his first. The photo inside was small and faded at the edges. Serena on their wedding day, laughing at something off camera, her veil caught sideways by the wind. Nell looked at it for a long time. Then she opened her mother's. The photo inside was of a man she had never met before this month, Hugh, 10 years younger, holding up a glass and grinning at whoever was behind the camera. She set the lockets back down, side by side, both open, both facing up. The two photographs looked at each other across 3 inches of kitchen counter. Serena had come in from the other room and stood in the doorway. She and Hugh looked at each other over their daughter's head. "They've been in different places for a long time," Nell said, with the authority of someone delivering a verdict. "Now they can be in the same place." She walked off to finish her homework. Hugh picked up both lockets, warm from her hands, and held them a moment before setting them back down together on the counter. Outside, the lake was running hard under a gray November sky. The same lake, the same sky, the same city where he had eaten alone on November 4th for 7 years, and told himself that grief eventually became something a person could live alongside. He had been right about that part. What he hadn't known was that the other side of grief, if you were stubborn enough and a little lucky, could turn out to look a great deal like the rest of your life. It wouldn't be simple. There would be hard conversations and uncertain mornings and days when all three of them would have to figure out in real time what exactly they were to one another. He knew that. But Nell had school in 6 hours and had already packed her bag the night before, and Serena had said quietly, over the dishes, that she thought she might look into getting her design work going again. She had always been good at it before all of this. And the 2 lockets sat open on the kitchen counter, side by side. For the first time in 7 years, neither one of them was being carried alone.